Hi there, everybody. My name is Nicholas. I'm gonna be give everybody a second to come in just in case everybody needs to sit down. So I am going to be just for those of you who have come in, don't know what I'm talking about, or those of you who have nothing better to do. I'm going to be talking about layering, just basic layering, edging, and highlighting for wargame models, such as this little guy right here. It basically is to help increase the quality of our paint jobs and to increase the speed of how we do it. So that's the basic idea of what I'm going to be talking about today. So who am I? Slide one. My name is Nicholas Paul Finuf. I have been painting little miniature things since I was 10 years old, and I have been painting wargame models since 2008. So I've been doing this for about 10 years. I've won a couple of awards locally for actually painting wargame models, and I, at our local game store, teach new people as a hobby. So I think that at least makes it so where I can teach you at least these basics. So what I'm going to be talking to you about today is first thing, what's the purpose? Why am I teaching you this? So the idea is I want to make sure people are able to paint easier and faster. One of the most difficult things about the hobby is people actually painting their models because it takes time. And having a process makes it faster. Having this kind of process also makes it to where you're going to have better quality miniatures. You're going to be more proud of what you have on the tabletop and on the shelf when you leave them at home. And it's just going to help improve the quality of your playing with your little toy soldiers in general. So let me go ahead and give you the basic theory behind all this. So the idea, slide one, the human eye is terrible at picking up detail at small scales. So at this scale, you can see my red shirt, you can see the details and the curves and the crevices because I obviously have not ironed my shirt, but you can see the human eye can pick it up at this scale. But for small things like with this cave spider example, without the shading, you can't see the details, and that's an up close picture. So what we need to do is we need to do what's called exaggeration. So an exaggeration theory is this. So let's take a look at this cross section here. The idea is that you're going to have your base coat. So like this is just a cross section of the model, and this is the detailing. And you're going to have your base coat, which is going to cover the whole area of that color. And then what we do is we pick two shades. We pick a shade that's darker, and we pick a shade that's lighter in each color that we do in a base coat. And you're going to take the shades darker and you're going to create a shade or what's called an ink, and you're going to get down into the details, and that's what's called a shadow. And then you're going to take the shade lighter, and that's going to be your layer, and that's going to go over just the tops, or what they call it a highlight here, but it's not a highlight. Highlighting we'll talk about in a minute. This is all pretty basic, so we'll move on to this next slide. There are a lot of techniques that you can learn that are a little bit more advanced. One of the best websites to do this from is from howtopaintminiatures.com. I have that listed in the pamphlet of my sources cited, so you can go there. But there are a lot more advanced techniques, like with this wraith. Yes, the blue glow is actually painted on the model. I don't even know how to do this, and I would hope that some of you might actually get so good that you can actually do this too. And that just makes wonderful models. So I hope that you guys would know how to do that. Moving on, I'm going to give you guys the basic instruction on how to do this. One thing I want to mention is that if you need someone to give you direct painting example, Warhammer TV on YouTube is one of the best places. Like if you watch Duncan paint on there, he will give you step-by-step instruction on how to do everything that I'm about to teach you right now. So let me give you a few tips. First of all, you want to thin your paints. Your paints need to be thinned, especially if you're using acrylics, which is what you should be using, acrylic paints. Your paints are going to be thinned 2 parts paint, 1 part water. And the reason why we do this is because it gives your paint the ability to leave your brush easily, and it doesn't leave thick like globs of paint all over your model. You want to have small brushes with straight bristles. Preferably, you want to have flexible bristles. You don't want to have a stiff brush. You're only going to want to do that for dry brushing, but we'll go over that in a minute. You want to make sure you have cleaning water nearby because you don't want to contaminate colors from previous things. You want to make sure you clean your brush thoroughly, periodically. And then finally, the last step that I'm going to go over is you want to prime your model. So a model that is primed, because plastic does not, plastic, resin, and pewter, which are 3 materials that models are typically made out of, paint does not stick to them. So we have to use a primer to make it so that you have a chemical. You can buy primer from whatever mega malt store where you get the spray paint, make sure it says primer. You can get different colors. This guy's primed black, but you're going to want to use that because what that does, that has a chemical that helps the paint bond to the model, which then gives us a surface for us to paint onto, which will allow us to move on to the next step, which is our base coat. You're going to want to base coat every area that you want to have a different major color in. So these guys, they're just straight up red. But if you have different areas, like let's say you have a cloak that you want to paint black, or you have a boots that want to be brown, you want to make sure that you do each area in a different base coat. The next step you're going to move on to is going to be your shading. Once everything's dried and you've done multiple coats to make sure that your base coat is thoroughly done, you're going to take your darker color that we talked about for each area and you're going to thin it down to 1 part paint, 2 parts water, or maybe 3 parts water, depending on how dark like a black would be. So you then will coat the whole area with this and you'll let the paint seep down into the details, like with this guy. With the next slide with the white armor, he has a black highlight and you can kind of see how it's going to seep down into the cracks of the model. That takes about an hour to 30 minutes to dry, so you're going to want to take a minute for the whole model to be dried from that. And then we're going to move on to our layering. You're going to take your lighter color that we talked about for each area, and you're just going to paint the tops of the details. Like with these Space Marines here, you see you have a before and after. We have the blue armor, and then afterwards you see there is actually a lighter color of blue on top, and that just helps exaggerate that color so that the eyes don't have to strain so much to see the details. Now, most people will actually stop at this point, and that's fine, but I'm actually going to give you guys a little bit of a tip to help bring your models out even more. So this next step is what we call edge highlighting, and it is not quite as difficult as this image makes it out to be, although I do like this image. Next slide, we're going to move into, there are these what are called dark angels. A friend of mine, he actually does a blog where he teaches people how to paint, and he uses this as his example for how to edge highlight. So the whole point about edge highlighting is that you want to go over with a much brighter shade than you did initially for the layering, and you're just going to take the edge of a really small brush, and you're just going to take your thinned paint and you're going to just paint the edges of the detail. And what this does is it creates that effect of light reflecting off of the model, and it really just brings out those details a lot more. You can save this for like leader HQ models. I know a lot of people that do that. But the next step, if you want to do this for your models, there are a few things you need to remember. The one thing that you do want to remember is that there are going to be areas on certain models that are impossible to do this with. That's going to be things like fur and chainmail and other things that just have tons of detail. So what you're going to want to do is dry brushing. You're going to take that stiff bristled brush, like I talked about before, and you're going to rub that light colored paint into it and into a paper towel until the paint is just barely coming off. So in this next slide, you're going to see here's the examples of what I'm talking about. And in the slide after that, we're going to talk about just an image explaining how it works. So you're just going to take that dry brush and you're just going to cover the tops of the contours. And that will give you your edge highlight, and with you basically saving you the headache of having to lose your sanity on that. A good example of this is painting basics for miniatures on YouTube. You can search for that and you'll find it. He gives you a great example of how to dry brush straight up. Well, I hope that this has been informative for everybody. My name is Nicholas Finuf again, and if you have any questions, go ahead and ask me after the speech. But hopefully this gives you guys incentive to go ahead and give it a try yourselves and have a great day.